So my name is David Klebanov. I joined Cisco as part of the Viptela acquisition. I'm part of the Enterprise Networking Business Unit. I lead a team of technical marketing engineers focusing on the SD-WAN technology. Now, we've done quite a few of those SD-WAN segments. I recognize a couple of faces here. This time I wanted to kind of take a little bit different approach with this presentation, and not just to tell you again and regurgitate the sort of what SD-WAN is, how it's built. And I would assume that by this time, you guys and the audience have a fair amount of knowledge and understanding, and we are at Cisco Live. There's plenty of sessions that are happening. So I'm going to focus on specific things around cloud adoption. And while we talk about cloud adoption, I'm going to talk about specifically how the CoLocations play a role in a cloud adoption story that our customers are, or the journey that they're making for the cloud adoption. Right? So we're going to talk about four things, or three things in a demo. I really want to show you guys so you can see that this is real. This is shipping. The cloud onRamp for CoLocations is a shipping feature in the latest release of code that we have for SD-WAN. So I just want to give you kind of a glimpse of how it looks like, right? So I really want to make sure that we squeeze the demo in. But mainly focus on three things, right? First, kind of recap the evolution for cloud adoption and how the CoLocations fit into that. And then specifically talk about cloud onRamp for CoLocations. Kind of demystify what the heck is that. If you try to read the acronym, it says CORK, right? Okay, so mental note, we should probably think about acronyms before making up the name of the solution. But anyways, Cloud onRamp for CoLocations, that's the full name for this. And then I will focus a fair amount of time to actually show you some practical designs. What can you do with this? It's really nice that there's technology out there with the cloud adoption, but what can you actually do with Cloud onRamp for CoLocations, right? So let me quickly kind of recap the journey that the customers could be taking in order to adopt the cloud. And when we talk about the cloud, we really talk about the two main clouds, the SaaS cloud, which is the SaaS applications, Office 365, Salesforce, Dropbox, Box, whatnot. Office 365 is by far the most popular application. And then we have the infrastructure as a service, which is the AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Compute, slew of others, right? So how were these clouds consumed pre-SD-WAN days? Okay, backhauling. Branch needs to talk to something in the cloud, over the MPLS private network, into the data center. Data center is the crown jewels. That's where the security lives. From there, you branch out in all the other clouds. So by now, everybody has realized that this is really suboptimal, and that's not the way to build modern networks. So SD-WAN comes into this and says, okay, let's shift this paradigm. Let's change it and let's disaggregate it. Let's distribute it. And when we say distribute, we're really talking about here the remote side that now connects, instead of connecting to a single transport, it connects to a multitude of transports. It connects into an SD-WAN fabric. The data center that used to be the focal point for all the connectivity now also lives in an SD-WAN fabric, and it's obviously providing the resources that it has, but it's no longer the crown jewels that everything must go through the data center in order to reach other destinations. For example, if we're talking about extending an infrastructure as a service from SD-WAN standpoint, we can extend the fabric directly in there. When we're talking about SaaS cloud adoption, we can do direct internet access through internet. So really disaggregating this notion of how cloud access is designed. And where the cloud onRamp for CoLocation fits into this, it's
They'll be up there.
That's not where it fits.
It's that cloud again.
It's that cloud again, yeah. It's the cloud we didn't want to connect to. Okay, and the cloud onRamp for CoLocations is an optional path that the customer can make, right? They can stick with the traditional SD-WAN approach of distributed access, but then they can also go with a regionalized access, where you have that CoLocation entities that you can host in the Carroll neutral facilities, right? Equinix or whatnot, right? And then by extending the fabric there, I'm establishing the footprint of that regionalized services footprint, right? And then from there, I can split into the clouds. So this is a sort of a complementary notion to the way that the cloud adoption was done with just a pure SD-WAN approach. Right. Okay, so that's kind of to set the stage where before SD-WAN, during SD-WAN, and SD-WAN with CoLocations. Now, if we look at the adoption with SD-WAN, I kind of clicked on that, but I'll double click on that for a minute. When we're talking about adopting the cloud with SD-WAN, we're talking about building this fabric, right, that interconnects remote sites, data centers, cloud destinations under the control and management plane of SD-WAN fabric, which is the Cisco vManage and the Cisco vSmart. Right? So as you can see, it's a single holistic fabric that now gets extended between the branches, but also touches the cloud, and the whole value of SD-WAN gets extended all the way into the cloud. If we're talking about SaaS applications, then for SaaS applications, it's a little bit different, but we are talking about making an intelligent direct internet access where we can quantify and qualify the connection to the ISPs and make sure that we choose the best performing ISP. And if there is no best performing ISP, we can actually send this traffic through the gateway sites or through the regional hub sites, and that's exactly one of the places where this cloud onRamp for CoLocations is going to fit in. We can use the help of a regional site in order to send the traffic to it and then exit to the cloud, SaaS cloud this way. As you can see, different types of clouds, different concepts how to adopt them, but again, SD-WAN here provides you the key for either extending the fabric or intelligently routing through a direct internet access exit points. Now, let's now look at how the cloud onRamp for CoLocations changes some of the things in here. So first, we need to understand what it is. So what is cloud onRamp for CoLocations? So the mission statement is simple. The customer wants to regionalize the access into the cloud. It's not necessarily just access to the cloud, but in this case, we'll talk about access to the cloud. So they want to establish a footprint in the colo facility. So what would it take today? Today, it's a do-it-yourself approach. I need to bring some routers, I need to bring some switches, I need to start configuring them, make sure that I have network extended into that colo facility. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to expedite that. And we have an awesome tool called vManage, which is a single pane of glass for managing everything SD-WAN. If only vManage could manage this colo infrastructure. The problem is that it's not just routers anymore. Because colo, we don't want to physically put routers in there, even though someone might want to do that. We may want to do virtual routers. For virtual routers, I need compute. I may need switching infrastructure. Who is going to manage that? So what we have done is we have augmented Cisco vManage to provide management for the compute and the switching infrastructure that is resident in that colo facility. So we provide switches, which is the Catalyst 9500. We provide servers, which are the CSP 5444 platforms. And those are cabled the way that we would request you to cable. And then the management piece is handed over to vManage. And vManage just orchestrates this entire stack of switches, compute, and deploying virtual network functions, the VNFs on top of them.
But that's only hardware related to the SD-WAN deployment, right?
No.
No.
So the hardware,
phones and PCs and manage it with vManage?
not the PCs, right?
Well,
it is
endpoints.
Right. So this is the switching infrastructure and a compute infrastructure and the VNFs on top of it. Now we're going to touch on what those VNFs could be. They're not necessarily SD-WAN VNFs. I can instantiate firewalls. I can instantiate IPS IDS. I can instantiate load balancers. I can instantiate any network services on top of this physical infrastructure.
Okay.
But vManage is now managing the entire stack. As you can see that it manages the infrastructure, which is the metal, right? Mm-hmm. And the service groups, which are the service chains. And then it uses the SD-WAN policies to steer the traffic through that colo. So build the colo, deploy the services in the colo, and steer the traffic to the colo. And all of that is under the umbrella of Cisco vManage.
And it's all with the premise that we need to regionalize access to various cloud, whether it's software as a service like Office 365, but that's the goal, right? Regionalize access through whatever kind of POPs you have geographically.
That is true. When I'm going to talk about use cases, I'm going to show use cases that go beyond the cloud adoption.
Okay.
But yes, cloud could be one of the beneficiaries of this architecture, but we can do other things. It can help with migrations. It can help with remote access. There's other things I'm going to show you from deployment use cases standpoint. In this case, we're talking about cloud adoption, but yes, you're absolutely right. Access to Office 365. Is it directly from the branch? If it's good, yes. What if it's not good? Okay, send it to the colo. How am I going to create my presence in the colo? This is how you do it. Automated through vManage. We still require you to, rack and stack gear, plug it with cables. That is still required because you need to build the physical infrastructure. But once it's built, it's handed over to vManage for management. And the rollout of the VNFs on top of it is obviously something that is done through vManage.
Okay, so there's nothing I have to manage outside of vManage
Nope.
that you're introducing.
I
was just having this conversation with a customer, and they didn't care at all about saving MPLS links and money.
Yeah.
They didn't care. They cared about managing everything through vManage. That's
Right.
what they got excited about.
Yes. So this is yet another thing that vManage can manage for you, which is the infrastructure piece. So when you think about vManage, is it just for SD-WAN routers? Not anymore. It can manage switches, and it can manage compute, and it can manage hypervisor, because it runs NFVIS, which is Cisco's sort of KVM-based hypervisor, right? So it now manages kind of the full stack that would be going into the colo. So I'll give you a little bit kind of a snippet of how the packet flow goes, because I know you guys are probably curious. This is not a cabling diagram, but it just gives you a representation of how that topology at the colo would actually look like. So these are the two CSP servers, right? Why two? Well, for redundancy, but not just for redundancy, for extra capacity. Because I may want to deploy a lot of VNFs on it. And the placement of the VNFs is done automatically by vManage based on the resource availability on those CSPs. So if I'm planning to deploy just a few VNFs, maybe just 2 servers is enough for high availability. If I'm planning to do really kind of a massive VNF rollout at the colo, I may need more. So in this case, we're having 2. And what runs on them is really the hypervisor, which we're not showing here, but the hypervisor run on it, the VNFs get deployed on it, and then you have those 9500 switches. They play kind of a dual role. They accept inputs from the wide area network, and they also provide connectivity between multiple servers. Because servers need to talk to each other, so it's not depicted in here, but imagine that those switches also provide connectivity between the servers. So they're both kind of a front end and a back end.
Why did you go with the 95 just for the 10 gig SFP ports?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there any configuration that I would have to do with the customer, or does this come preloaded? Just go ahead and plug it in?
This comes everything preloaded. You order one PID, one product ID, everything gets shipped to you.
Including cabling?
That I'm not sure.
I want Cisco patch cables.
Okay, maybe including
Power
cables,
cable.
I'm not sure, but maybe cable is included.
This is Meraki.
But it is very important to cable it because it's a very prescriptive solution the way it's done today. It's important to cable it like we tell you. So follow the cabling diagram. And I did not include the cabling diagram because it would be a little bit overwhelming. But as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of cables you need to connect to.
We love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, okay. Servers to switches, switches to switches. So yes, cable it the way we tell you to cable it. Okay. And the idea is really simple. I'm connecting WAN circuits into this 9500 switches. Those are switches. Circuits turn into VLANs. So those are trunks. They turn into VLANs. They go into the first VNF. And then they can be hopping between VNFs based on a service chains that you define, which I'm going to show you, hopefully. And then at some point, it gets out of the last VNF in the chain. So I don't have to use all of the VNFs in there. I can use VNFs that really appropriate for this particular chain. It gets out into the WAN and goes wherever it needs to go. In this particular case, may go to Office 365. So a user arrives from somewhere here below, goes through this chain, which could be a router and a firewall, and it goes out into Office 365. And all of that is orchestrated through vManage, starting from managing the physical infrastructure, VNFs, and the traffic steering as well. Okay, nobody asked this question, but I'm going to address it here. Is it Cisco only? Well, of course not. Okay, so there's a VNFs that we have certified to work on this. The hypervisor that runs is NFVIS, which is the Cisco's version of a hypervisor. It's KVM based. So technically, anything can run on it, but there's a certain VNFs we have certified. So that is the list as of today of the VNFs that we have certified. Obviously, we're going to be adding more. It does not show Cisco because it's only third party, but obviously we have certified Cisco VNFs as well.
And is the certified version always going to be kind of an N-1 from these third-party vendors?
So we probably will not certify the latest and greatest as it comes out, but there will be certain lag in how we certify it. But we will make sure that this is not a Cisco only or lock-in solution that you can only deploy Cisco VNFs and Cisco services.
What hypervisor are you using on the back?
NFVIS. That is the name of the hypervisor.
Okay.
It's KVM based. If you guys are aware, know the ENCS, Enterprise Network Compute System. Okay, so ENCS is a Cisco branded server. It runs NFVIS as a hypervisor. This was CSP, so it's a little bit beefier box from resourcing standpoint, but it runs the same hypervisor, NFVIS. So NFVIS is the hypervisor. And because it's KVM based, anything can run on it. That's why these are the VNFs we had certified, but potentially anything can run. Okay, let me now spend a little bit of time to kind of show you what are the practical designs. Oh, drink some water. Some practical designs that you can use the CoLocation with. Right? Some of those we kind of touched upon. Okay, so SaaS adoption. Now my colo. I'm not going to now kind of dive in what's inside the colo. I'm just going to represent it with a circle. Because imagine, it's all automated through vManage. So behind the scenes, inside the circle, there's compute and switching infrastructure runs and all of that. And what I'm really interested in this time is the service chains. What are the network services that I want to subject this traffic to? So one of the cases was the SaaS adoption. If you recall, I have a site that has an internet connection. I'm doing direct internet access into, let's say, Office 365. Okay, there's a level of security that I want to provide in here. That security, we didn't talk about security, but imagine that security is embedded within the router, because when you do direct internet access, obviously you want to provide a level of security. Firewalls, IPSs, advanced malware protection, all kind of security controls to make sure that your DIA exit point is secure. So this happens at the branch office. What happens if this DIA degrades severely? Okay, I want to reroute. What do I reroute through? CoLocation. Okay, the concept is not new, but what is new is now we can manage this CoLocation. And we can help you build this CoLocation with that vManage automation. So this is, in fact, a combination of two features. Cloud onRamp for CoLocation to build it up, and a cloud onRamp for SaaS to provide efficient traffic routing through DIA or through Colo. So it's a convergence of two features. One, building an infrastructure and deploying VNFs. Another one, efficiently routing through a best performing circuit, DIA or the Colo. So that's one. Another one is some of our customers, even though we had, if you recall, when we talked about an infrastructure as a service, when we talked about Amazon and Microsoft Azure, we said, okay, there's a way that we can extend an SD-WAN fabric in there. But some customers, and that's probably a preferred way, but some customers say, okay, that's not for me yet, because I'm invested in the private mechanisms of connectivity. I have Direct Connect to AWS. I have Express Route to Microsoft Azure. Not ready to depart from those. Can you help me out? Sure. Where are those provisioned? Guess what? They're in the colos, because primarily that's how you connect to them. Even though there's other options that you could be connecting through, like an MPLS network, but if we focus on the colo option, many of those are anchored on the colo. Guess what? I can automate the colo rollout now, and I can plug the direct connects and the express routes through the colo and basically make those available through the SD-WAN fabric. Yes, please.
In terms of the path determination from the remote site, either through directly to the internet or the colo, or even the data center again, a lot of those cloud services use like an Anycast sort of infrastructure to determine best path for you anyway. Is that taken into account with this, or?
So What you asked for relates more to the previous option when we're talking about SaaS adoption.
Right.
You're right. It's not quite any CAS, but Office 365 is everywhere. And why is it everywhere? Is because Microsoft has POPs everywhere, and Office 365 is hosted out of those POPs. So with this particular feature, we are able, and this is called the Cloud onRamp for SaaS. It's not entirely CoLocation story. You could have this without a CoLocation. But the Cloud onRamp for SaaS allows you to probe the performance of Office 365 through those POPs. So it's not quite unicast. Those are individually IP'd entries. So you can probe the performance through those POPs and then determine which way to that particular POP is better. Is it ISP1 or ISP2? What if both of them are bad? What if I have only one of them and that one is bad? Okay, go through the colo. Okay, again, the IIS, private means of connectivity into the public sort of cloud service providers. So those are the cloud cases. But I mentioned that the cloud onRamp for CoLocations and the concept of CoLocations is not just limited to cloud. So what are other things you can do? So you can do interesting things like that. I can, for example, steer the traffic that goes between the branch and the data center through a colo where I can subject this to the firewall. Why is this interesting? Okay, let's say a user brings an infected laptop into the office. I want to and starts doing denial of service attacks or whatnot. I want to stop that. I want to mitigate that. What can I do? Okay, there's a security we can embed within the router in the branch. So I can mitigate it like that. What if I don't have that, or what if my information security policy mandates to use next-gen firewall of certain vendor? Maybe Cisco, maybe not Cisco. Where do I put that firewall? Okay, do I put this in every branch? No, put this in regional locations, and we will spin it up. This is the VNF, right? We can spin up the third-party VNF in the colo on this infrastructure of the switches and servers that we talked about earlier, and then steer the traffic between the remote site and a data center through the colo. And if something is happening and I need to drop this traffic, I can just drop this at the colo. So basically this green line will never continue, just dies at the colo. So that is an interesting concept, not a new concept. We had this before. But what's new is now you can roll out colos really fast. Another interesting thing you can do is it can help during migrations. You have an SD-WAN fabric, and you have non-SD-WAN, which is, let's say, traditional MPLS network. How do I bridge them together? Okay, well, the way we advocate the best and the safest approach and the most proven approach is to go through a specific places, transition hubs, places where overlay and underlay networks can route to each other. So where are those? Those can be main data centers, but that's sometimes a little bit too far. Because data centers, for organizations that are centralized in just a couple of data centers, backhauling everything to the data center is a little bit costly from a latency standpoint. Why don't they regionalize those interconnect points between SD-WAN and non-SD-WAN? Where am I going to regionalize them in? Colo facilities. Spin out an instance of a colo, spin out routing infrastructure in there, route between MPLS and SD-WAN at the colo. So it's not a cloud use case, but in fact a migration use case that can help. And again, rollout of the colo is, or fast rolling out of the colo helps a lot here. Another one, some of our customers are building hierarchical networks. What does hierarchical network mean? I have certain part of the world that I want to mesh. They will talk together to each other only within that mesh. If they want to go to another region, they cannot go directly. They have to pass through this SD-WAN core infrastructure. What is this core? It's many times interconnects between colos. Again, a CoLocation. So I can spin those up, and I can spin up routing infrastructure in there, potentially maybe even firewalls if I want to inspect the traffic going between multiple regions. And again, the fabric that exists in region 1 will have to go through this colo facility in order to get to the remote region. So this case talks about a hierarchical SD-WAN fabric. And again, CoLocations can help in this case as well. And an interesting use case that, frankly, I was kind of surprised that how much interest people got in this use case is a remote access. So people are saying, okay, great, we have users that have remote access VPN, and those need to connect into the data centers or whatever resources that live on the SD-WAN fabric. What do? I need a VPN termination appliance or VNF, right? So where do I put those? In a data center. Okay, great, I could do that, but if I know that my user population is really distributed, I can have a colo presence and have a virtual VPN server in there that they can connect into. Now, all of these cases that I told you before, they're not either or. These are all service chains. So every time I mention colo, that does not mean it's a different colo. It could be the same colo or the same infrastructure, just multiple VNFs, and I can have those service chains that, based on how the traffic arrives into that colo, it will enter a specific chain. So by adopting this CoLocation philosophy, I can actually achieve all of those things with the same footprint. Okay, now I want to show you a demo. But before I show you a demo, a shameless plug, we wrote a book. Okay, so we wrote a book. If you guys want to access this book, the book is accessible through here. It's not a book for CCIEs, so I want to make sure that we have the right expectation, right? It's a book. That one is being worked on. This book is a book that's going to describe different use cases. CoLocation is one of those use cases, right? But there's plenty of other use cases in there. Right, so if you ever feel that you want to kind of flip through a book with use cases, you're more than welcome to do that. It's accessible through there.
Who wrote the book?
Who wrote the book?
Team effort.
It's a team effort of 12 people working effortlessly over 5 days for 12 hours a day. It's a book sprint. We wrote this book. I was one of the authors. We wrote the book in 5 days, this entire book. So be gentle. And when you read the book, think about that this book took 5 days to create only. Cisco Press book take a year to create. So have the right sort of mindset when you look through this book. 5 days, very intense, very compact, a lot of editing, rewriting, reviewing, whatnot. Anyways, I thought this could be an interesting resource for you guys. Okay, let me quickly show you in the last maybe 2 minutes. Okay. So this is the vManage, if you've never seen one, right? So the vManage that I was talking about, this is the single tool that allows you to configure everything about your SD-WAN. And what is now in there is under the menu on the left, the configuration. There's now, on the bottom, 3 cloud onRamp solutions. There's a solution for SaaS. This is the SaaS applications, efficient routing to them. This is the infrastructure as a service, directly going to the CSP, and the CoLocations, which is exactly what we talked about.
Is that the latest version, or is
so what you see here, this is the latest shipping version, 19.1.
Okay.
And that's the one that has the feature. It's a brand new, fresh feature. Okay, so when I click that, you already see that I have something created, but if I didn't, then basically I would click here on the button that would say provision, and as you can see, it kind of visually pops up this topology for you that says, great, 2 switches, 2 servers to begin with. This is the minimal footprint. And that's what you would have received when you've ordered that solution. So once it's all cabled, then basically vManage, there's a couple of things that you would need to configure in here. And the switches and the CSP servers, they all register to this vManage infrastructure and become entities, and I'm going to show you in a second, become entities within vManage. Okay? One more thing in here, you can see it says service groups on top. If I click on a service group, these are the service groups that I talked about before. I only have one in here, but you can imagine you can have a lot of them. And if I say 1, this is the service chain. I like to call it like a snake, right? It has a head and a tail, right? Okay, so things enter from the head and travel down the chain to the tail. And these are drag and drop. See, I can basically just go and and drop. Okay, maybe because it's already attached, right? So I cannot make changes because it's already attached. But when this is new and I haven't attached it, because basically I create the service group and then I attach it to the cluster. because this is already attached, it doesn't allow me to change anything, right? But if I were creating a new one, obviously it wouldn't be attached. Then I can modify it, drag and drop it into this sequence, and then each one of them, of course, has the proper configurations, right? Which we haven't talked about, but it has configuration. It has a bootstrap configuration, how much memory does it need, and all of that. It's a VNF, right? Has compute, storage requirements, right? And so those are basically, if I now go back into the monitoring screen on top and I select network, now I have this CoLocation clusters. And if I click on it, it shows me the cluster. And I can click on the cluster, and here's the cluster. And it shows me here the sort of like a physical, CPU, memory, disk space utilization on this one. I can keep on clicking on it, and I can say VNFs. Oh, great, I have a couple of VNFs in here. Let me click on a VNF. I can see, how much utilization is this VNF receiving, CPU utilization, memory utilization, disk utilization, things like that.
They all still show up in the list of the vEdges and everything, right? On those nodes.
If I have vEdge as a VNF, virtual vEdge, which is the vEdge cloud, as one of the VNFs, yes. In fact, in here, if I go to monitor and I go to network and I don't go to CoLocation, so in here,
that's what I meant, right.
You can see, I would see this as just a router. For example, here, I can see actually CSP is an entity. This server is now an entity that vManage manages.
Yep.
So that's just kind of a little bit under the covers of what this is. And the premise is really is the adoption of CoLocations for those use cases where customers want to adopt CoLocations.